Kira's gonna manage the slides for us today. So we do have some interactive moments and just appreciate you guys all joining. So hopefully all of you know, but for those of you that don't, I am Amy Seaman, our executive director. I'm based here in Helena, and Kira is now our development lead, and she is based in Kentucky. And it's primarily been the two of us working in concert with Ladara Bridson, who's shared staff with Montana Association of Conservation Districts. So just happy to have you guys here. I definitely want to give a nice shout out to board members I see on the chat here. So thank you, board members. Let's see, we have Erin and Hannah. And my mouse is being very strange here. And then some past board members I see. Oh, I see Shelby's on there as well. Some past board members as well, Jordan. And they'll get another shout out later as we talk about our strategic plan, because the board has been integral in some of what we're going to share. And so it's been definitely a team effort. And today we'll be just digging in a little bit more about the work that we did. So we are just going to do a welcome. That's pretty much done. Welcome. And then I want to dive in and look at some of our impact report. So we tried to put everything together that happened in 2025. A lot of that focuses on successes in the Watershed Fund. And then I'll turn the mic back over to Kiera, because we are trying to keep people energized and excited about the work to be done this year. It is wild that we're kind of a quarter of the way through the year, but there's a lot of things coming up that we want to make sure you know about and get excited about. That as we went through last year, I think one of the overarching, one of the imbued themes was basically we need to try to make this fun, keep collaboration moving forward, and really engage people at a different level to make things happen, because things are not going to work out the same way that they always have. Then we're going to talk very briefly about upcoming reports, State of the Watersheds Report. Some of you may or may not be familiar with, but we want to make sure everyone in the network knows what's going on with that. And we tried some of this out at the symposium, but Kira's going to go through a new program called Mentimeter. Some of you may have used it, but it's an alternative kind of survey method, something a little different than Google Sheets, and you can do it through presentations and super interactive. But we know that State of the Watershed Report and surveys in general can be very hard to digest and sort of intense. So we're trying to find creative ways to engage people with that process. And as well, that's something we've used to engage with the Montana Wetland Council. So we're going to talk a bit about our partnership with the Wetland Council that's taking place right now. And then I do want to dive in a little bit deeper. We'll have some time for discussion about ideas and thoughts we've had for our conservation plan for the next couple years. Even what we're calling it, but it is a strategic plan. But I thought, all of Montana watersheds, how do we support all of these moving forward? So we do have primary goals. I love the first one. We're going to just try to celebrate a little bit, give shout outs to all the work that people have done, kick off the events, announce this new Wetland Council website effort. That's something, a little anecdote is that it's the Montana Wetland Council, something I've been involved with since I started conservation in Montana. And I've always hoped that MWCC and MWC could work more closely together, because, we can monopolize all the MWC acronyms primarily. And then I do want to give you guys a chance to contribute to the plan and give some feedback. So those are the primary goals. It's mostly Kiara and I today that are going to run through the program, but hopefully provide ample time for discussion, so you don't have to only listen to us talk. But of course, we do want to just thank all of our supporters that have been with us through this semi-wild year. Without them, it would not be possible. And tons of organizations and individuals have contributed, and you'll see a little bit more about that as we look at the numbers. Thank you, Kiara. That was perfect timing. So talking about the impact report here, I think our biggest take-home message and thing that we want to communicate in this slide says most of it, is that the people we work with in our networks are really what make it possible. And when we've talked a lot about, do metrics tell the actual story or show what values are behind the organization? It's not always just numbers, but for us as a group that's really focused on connection, communicating, coordinating on all of that, the numbers really do help us tell a story and just how many people are working together to improve Montana's waterways. I've been trying to use the words, restore. It seems like most groups actually, they're not just working to manage waterways, but are actually working to restore them, bring them even to a better condition, execute the watershed restoration plans. But it takes a lot of people. And the one number I didn't put on here, but you can see more detail on the impact report. There's also 2,400 additional partners that the groups we support worked with. And those are partner groups, different local NRCS or agency partners, county commissioners, individual water consultants, anything from professional to nonprofit to individual landowners, across the board, all those partners coming together to decide on community priorities for their watershed. So I do really think that's the most important piece. And hopefully it's been helpful for those members in the network to have that connection. I mean, imagine we're all probably 2 degrees of separation from each other at this point, which would definitely be the goal. One of the primary ways that we've managed to reach these goals as well, though, is through the programming of the Montana Watershed Fund. And I just want to point that out because, it has been a wild year for planning too, as we'll talk about, but it really has been a program to help focus the ways that we can directly bring capacity to groups. So most of the numbers that we report and successes that we try to share that conservation groups and watershed groups have accomplished are hopefully and partly enabled by the Watershed Fund. And so this, I think, is important to share, is that there has been a lot of thinking about why the Watershed Fund, why are we building it, why do we try to fundraise for it? And it is because of this theory of change that MWCC has had behind it since its inception, and really boils down to this: increasing local capacity, bolsters conservation resources, advances the watershed approach in a cycle of positive returns. People see the successes, as then they want to do it, or their neighbor wants to do conservation. And so ideally it both bolsters the investment from people and from financial resources around us. So it's been a key program. It will definitely continue to be a key program. And Kara, if you want to go to the next slide. What's really cool to see as well, that you all know metrics, and we've talked again a lot about metrics, boiling them up, boiling them down. But for us, this is sort of a quick picture of what the Watershed Fund has done in all the state of Montana across the board just in 2025. And these, again, are projects that groups we fund are able to complete. And I know I love seeing that, 89 miles of streamline and shoreline improved. And as many of you know, like bank restoration, willow planting, native grass reseeding, all kinds of great stuff that helps the non-point source work primarily. We just got back from the Rural Water Systems Conference, thinking a lot about non-point source versus point source pollution. And I think it is hard to tell non-point source stories, but rolling these numbers up together does show that larger impact across the landscape. And there again kind of shows that 2,470 community partners reached by all the groups supported. And that's just so important because it shows how many people are invested in getting this work done. It does affect our backyards. So, of course, many important funders behind this work. That's something we are thinking about a lot as we move into our strategic plan, and we've had a lot of success over the years. Even in a tough year, 2025, we were able to pass through over $137,000, but we also know that despite that being a really great number, it's not necessarily keeping pace with need. And there's we have great stories here within the work that have been done to hopefully grow how that program works in the future. And so that's just a brief overview of what I think are kind of the highlight of our successes. I didn't want to read word for word or go to into an impact report that you guys can see, but we'd love for you to check it out. Kiera will share the link. And we wanted to see if there's time for discussion, or we're happy to answer questions. But like I said, most of what we are able to do numbers wise is through the Watershed Fund. Kiera will talk about our communications a little bit more and how we reach people ourselves, but it's an impressive amount of work that the network does. So I'll open up for questions or comments.
Seeing none, I will take over. We have a full lineup from now to September. We start off with the Helena Art Walk downtown. So join us Friday night, May 8th, at our office. We will have Amy and I believe Bo and Alexis Crees. They'll have all kinds of exotic and precious stones from their travels that they'll be showing off and have open for you to purchase. You can find out more about Helena Art Walk at the link I put in the chat. And then we have our Watershed Summer campaign. This will be our 4th year. So I am opening that as of this moment. Anyone interested in joining us for this campaign can register at the link in the chat. We'll have it from June 21st to September 22nd. On your right-hand side is an example of what the finished product looks like on Facebook. So I work with groups to create these posts and then share them out. It's a great way to reduce capacity for our groups and get a great product out there that highlights all the work that they're doing. We are seeking sponsors, so anyone interested in that, feel free to reach out to me. We started in 2023 with 25 organizations, and each post averaged about 139 accounts reached. In 2025, we had 35 organizations that we highlighted and got up to 275 accounts averaged per post. So we're steadily increasing. And then,
And let me real quick, Kiera.
Yeah.
I think you just misspoke, but you said reduce capacity. But this program started out of groups that some don't have any communications staff at all, and or no Facebook following, no social media following, and it has been just a really nice way to try to elevate all those programs at once. And then it directly ties into that sort of our theory of change, where we also need to just promote these successes and make sure that people in your communities know what's happening.
Thank you. Yes, I did misspeak. I meant increase capacity. As part of our Watershed Summer campaign, last year we started a Cornhole for Clean Water tournament. So that was a way to get our celebration from online to real life. It worked out really well. We're trying to plan that for September 19th in Missoula. The location will be announced soon. Then in August 3rd specifically, at the Bluestone House, we've been invited by Wild Montana to co-host with them during one of their Bands for Lands concert nights. We'd love to have you come out and join us, have some great family fun. And to round it off, we have our Watershed Tour, September 14th through the 18th. We're working with the Montana Pesticide Stewardship Partnership Program, or PSPP, and we are doing a full tour across the Columbia River Basin. It's our biggest tour yet that we've ever done. We will have a pre-tour webinar and then go from Butte to Hamilton to Missoula, South Flathead, and North Flathead. We'll start registration here in a couple of weeks. We are seeking sponsors, and we have a bit of an option. So we can have people sign up as a supporting partner. They'll get access to enhanced sponsorship opportunities, or we just have tour sponsorship and recognition. I ask anyone interested in that to reach out to us. You can also, everyone, go to this link for more information about the tour in general. I'll put that in the chat. There. Anyone have any questions about the events?
I will add, since we have the time, to mention the difference in how the event is happening this year. If those of you are familiar, the Watershed Tour is our highlight event every other year that we would alternate with the Watershed Symposium. So in 2024, we were in the Sun River watershed, and this one is, as Kira mentioned, moving around the Columbia River Basin. And a lot of that is because of our focal area with the PSPP, of course, but we also have definitely seen the difficulties that some groups have in traveling. And we're hoping to keep the events as accessible as possible so that groups could sign up for 1 or 2 days, but they don't have to commit to the entire tour. And hopefully it does keep things accessible cost-wise for us to manage the event and as well for people to attend. So versus some others, there's not as much heavy detail on like, these are the hotels you must use. You know, we'll try to find deals for people, but there won't be as many group events in the hotel piece. So we're really hoping it enables people to show up where in their local area and get the a similar experience. And that's where the webinar in the beginning can hopefully really help set the stage for why we're visiting the sites we are visiting, what the PSPP is, and then what some of the other, what the great projects are that are happening in the basin. There's a ton of funding right now going in for stormwater projects and native plants and water quality testing, fish tissue sampling. It's really, really cool. So we're hoping to give people a little bit of a taste of it. And I guess maybe amongst PSPP, we've talked about, like, we kind of want to make Eastern Montana a little jealous that they don't have a PSPP, because it is really awesome. And we're going to learn a lot about impacts to the watershed there. So yeah, please ask questions about any of the events. If you're in Helena, join us. If you know artists, have them connect with us too. Okay. Well, we'll keep going. You guys can jump in at any time or raise your hand or whatever if you need. So the other quick thing we just wanted to reintroduce and sort of get people hearing about and know that this is on the horizon is, in typical years, we would produce a state of the watersheds report in odd years. And the timing for odd years has been to ideally overlap with the Montana legislative session so that decision makers and others and agencies can be informed of what's going on in the watershed communities. So the State of the Watersheds report then has been an undertaking by MWCC that would happen in the even years so that the report can be produced, which means what we want to do is get back on our sort of regular programming schedule and actually start the questionnaires and surveys now and work really hard and diligently through the fall to make sure that the surveys get done to produce the report. As you can see here, the report, it's essentially an impact report on a biennial scale. But what it really seeks to do is to make sure we speak to as many of the conservation districts and watershed groups that we support as we can, so that we understand the capacity, priorities, limitations, and sort of hopes and dreams, I guess to say, of the watershed groups that we serve. That way we can really inform our own direction, but also we can inform funders that we work with. And it is something that I have had people, ask me about, funders ask me, the next question after we saw a lot of changes in 2025, funders say, well, what do the watershed groups need right now? What's the focus right now? How are things changing? Are there big changes in capacity, et cetera? And we haven't done one of these formal reports in a while. So we will be able to better answer all those questions that really truly represent the whole community rather than maybe groups we've interacted with more so in 2025. So we're going to undertake this project basically starting today, somewhat of a kickoff, just letting everyone know. The survey is targeted to the conservation districts and watershed groups that we serve. So it's not something that necessarily consultants or businesses or things like that will be focused on, but it is for the watershed groups. So you can see on here we do a lot of basic metrics that we do want to see rolled up over the state level. This especially is helpful when there are a lot of state grants through both DEQ and DNRC that have helped provide funding or match funding for accomplishing this work. And I think this type of product does really speak well to the legislators, to people that are hearing the budgets and making decisions on whether or not these programs should be continued. So that definitely has a strong connection to telling the story of what's being done, how the money is being used, what other dollars it's bringing in. Maybe you notice on the impact report, even in a slimmer year than usual, the match funding that was reported to the watershed grants that we were able to give out, it's over $200,000. So we know there's a lot being put into these efforts, and this is definitely an effort to show that commitment and show that work that's being done, so it can't be overlooked. And what we're going to do as we go into the next part of this is that this is actually quite a long survey, and in the past it's been a little difficult for groups to do it. It takes a while, etc. We're working really hard this year to fund and raise scholarships and actually like a stipend almost, so that the groups we do this with can be recognized for their time in doing it, so that we can actually get really quality information and sit down one-on-one and get through the process to make sure people felt heard. One of the unique things about this is that we will ask groups financial questions, because we do try to understand like truly what capacity do groups have to do watershed conservation. Do we have any money in the bank? Do we have staff? Where are our stress points? Where can people really help out? And more as I've been in my seat and answer the phones and things, it's like the calls I get, also groups are willing to give trainings. There's a lot of training opportunity in our community, but figuring out what does the watershed community need as a training before we as MWCC try to host something that's not relevant. So these types of surveys can really help figure out direction and or specific programming that we will bring forward in the years after that. So I'm sure there's some of you maybe on this call that have been involved in one in the past. Is that possible? Maybe not. Yeah, perhaps not. So anyway, we're going to try to do it with some smaller surveys. We're going to try to make it much more digestible. And we're waiting here shortly in May to see if that we got the funding that we've requested for stipends, and that would be a really great. Yeah, that would be exciting. Anyone have questions about anything we covered yet? We're just kind of going through things pretty quickly, but okay. This is the more meaty and exciting part anyway, so we can have time for discussion. So I don't know if anyone else other than our board and staff on this call undertook strategic planning in 2025, but it was a very interesting year that breezed by. It was a very interesting year to do planning. And I want to give a big shout out to the board members and staff that put time into this planning effort. We got started in spring, early spring of last year, and based on the way all our schedules worked out, we just kind of went right for it and jumped right in with an all-day in-person meeting in May. And then subsequent meetings, subgroups of the board meeting from May through about January of this year. And our board, of course, continues to discuss it. And we've had some input from members of our water committee as well. So it has been an iterative process. Some pieces of it are a little slimmer than we had hoped based on funding that was available, but I think we did a really good job diving in and really having some discussions about what motivates our work, who we're serving, and how we can better serve our network, and also better talk about the services we already provide. We do talk a lot about storytelling, and so we did that internal look at how we tell our own story about the work that we do. And I wanted to thank as well, Rachel Goins is a consultant that we worked with out of Missoula. She helped design the all-day meeting and kind of lay out some of the thinking framework for us to look at all the different programs and services and how they serve us and what values they help us uphold and what kind of added value we can then bring to all of the on-the-ground work that our groups are doing. Our groups, the groups, all of the community groups. So we did do a lot of digging into individual words and what words mean that are in our plan as well, because we do want to make sure that we are looking at this in a supportive way so that we're never interfering with work that gets done, but just building capacity and helping drive water conservation and restoration forward across the whole state. So as I mentioned, it was kind of a interesting year to plan. It was a bit chaotic, but it was also a fun year to plan because Kira and I previously have been just doing a lot of work thinking about different development opportunities, marketing opportunities that we have. And we also took a development class together. And so I think being able to sit down and actually try to build a new framework about how we could re-envision programs that we have, it's actually kind of cathartic maybe to put some of it on paper and see it written out as something we can now strive for and have clear actions to move towards. So we were super fortunate to have funding partners kick off the event and help us make sure we can actually get that face time with our board that is so super important. So all these groups here, Arthur Blank Foundation, the DNRC was the Watershed Management grants, the strategic planning grant, a little bit of general funds from High Stakes and Cinnabar Foundation, and then a little bit from the DEQ education mini grants. You know, putting that all together really helped us actually get, like I said, the time to sit down and think about this and work together as a board, which is never easy. The space was donated from University of Montana. We got to go to their law school building, which So Heather Stokes is an outgoing board member, but was crucial to the process where we were over there in Missoula. So shout outs to everybody. It's hard to get meetings together and do the work, but we did the work. We did the sticky notes. We had everything laid out. We looked at our values and what we're trying to bring to the watershed community. And what we really started to think about and what framed the strategic plan thinking and how and why we're trying to engage you all today in this is that the watershed approach has been so crucial to how the watershed groups themselves work that we think it's really important to think about it today and how it framed our thinking for the plan, but also wanting to double check that that's still all on the right track. Kara, do you want to go to the next slide? So that's why we didn't want to say, we do have a strategic plan that we've written and we're working on getting some of the final edits in, but we didn't want to call anything final without getting some feedback from the groups, because we do try to exercise the watershed approach. And we wanted to revisit it today because it's a concept that was born over many years of thinking, but it was solidified at an annual meeting, I believe in 2018, between 17 and 18, really solidified by groups like this, saying, are our values the same? Is the way that we're doing this correct? And if we fully internally created a strategic plan, I think without some outside feedback, it wouldn't feel quite as collaborative as the watershed approach asks us all to be. So it is a distinct strategy. It's rooted in individual values, community values, and mostly an effort to work collaboratively among stakeholders in moving things forward rather than getting projects stalled and, just seeing things have to go into litigation or never happen because the community can't get behind an issue. So here's a link for the tenets of the watershed approach. And we are going to revisit this a little bit to get some of your feedback about that. So I'll give everyone a minute to read that. Okay. So we will talk a little bit more about that here in a second. So I know I've said a few times, so 2025 was a little bit of a chaotic year for us. It did bring a lot of changes and has forced us, like many groups, to look internally and think about our own priorities and how to build moving forward. Should we change things? What needs to change, etc. And I would say overall in our strategic plan, there's not many dramatic changes or things that we think need to just be totally scrapped or totally rebuilt. And I think that's a good thing. And what it does really help solidify, though, is that the Watershed Fund and the work that can be supported and the capacity building that can come from supporting the Watershed Fund is truly a valuable resource and a valuable program for us to move forward. Since 2018, combination of private funds, agency funds have allowed us to put through over $1.5 million to groups. So we know that it really adds up. And we've always had sort of our own standard MWCC approach to raising those funds. But we all know that that looks a little different right now. So central to our strategic plan, in just addition to keeping up the communications and the tours and those events that we really find so crucial, the focus on change and improvement and goals is primarily under the Watershed Fund. We really want to build this. We want to see this work. We've been and are going to be rebranding the MWCC Watershed Fund as the Montana Watershed Fund, because I think hopefully you guys hear like, oh, the Montana Watershed Fund. This is something we can get behind, build a little bit of hype around it, build some more marketing materials, try to get it out there in the world as something people know about. It would be unique for us to have this as a fundraising mechanism, for like a forward-facing fundraising mechanism. We all know about foundations and donors you hear about on the radio, and I think our pie in the sky vision would be to have people know about that, like that in that way. Oh, the Montana Watershed Fund, like I know exactly what that is. And so as we focus on that over the next 3 years in the plan, what we'd like to accomplish, I think, is partly is articulating this goal right now and today, is trying to get the Watershed Fund back up to where we're granting more around the amounts of 300,000 a year than 150,000, which we have been. And in the past, this definitely has happened. But what will be different now is just the types of funding and ways of fundraising for the fund. So I think this is what I'm most excited about and would like to see succeed most, because primarily what we've seen is so many sideboards on the ways and uses of funding and different places, and funds getting more complicated to apply for. Sometimes it's a harder application for less funding and or similar funding year over year, and we would really want to build something that can keep pace and allow entities from any entity to contribute, basically. So we'll do a lot of the internal, this will require a lot of internal change, but also hopefully you all will see the external change in new marketing and more advocacy for contributing to the fund. And then the next big, or like not big, the next main goal that you'll see articulated that's perhaps different than in the past is we really want to understand our role in supporting and building capacity for organizations to participate in policy and education. These are things, and a lot of the questions I had as a director going into the strategic planning process is, how do I respond to phone calls that we get and inquiries from our group and anecdotal needs, in as much as we think about our board's planning process? So trying to think of what groups have asked for, and there's been a lot more policy questions perhaps than I would have thought. And so we have a goal this year of understanding like what is the role that MWCC, what topics and ways can we directly build groups' capacity to participate. So this, and then we have that for education as well. But again, like we're already a quarter through this year, which is really wild. And we don't want to over promise what we can deliver. So we have parsed this out so that we'll focus on policy capacity building during the remainder of this year so that we can feel ready and organized if there are education opportunities or pieces of information and that we need to coordinate and connect people with during the upcoming legislative session. Ideally, we will have the State of the Watersheds report as an educational piece of information for the session. So that's just nice, like baseline education. But we are going to work through the rest of this year to see like what topics and ways really should we and could we support groups, and what have groups been asking about groups. And we can talk about this too if there's time, or there will be time, but we can talk about it. It's like, it's very interesting to see what questions come up. So you'll see, or we have a Mentimeter question about this. There's all kinds of topics. I've been so surprised to get phone calls about subdivisions and things that I don't typically think of watershed groups being brought in on, but I do think is a future direction. So what we have for a goal this year is just written out as establish a framework for MWCC's engagement in public policy. Very simple. We want to work with you all to define policy priorities, and then as well, like focal levels of government. Do we want to do state? Do people need to understand how to support local government, etc.? And I'm really excited about this personally because I think it will allow me to bring personal experience that I've had at the legislature to groups so that they could decide how they want to work. So this will be a work in progress, and we'll see what you guys think about that here in a second. So similar for education, but education will be a focus in 2027 to create and define what we want to have as an education program. Right now, we're not planning to necessarily start any extra programs, but we want to understand what educational messages and needs we can weave into what we already have. So for example, the Watershed Summer has been an awesome educational program, but is there a way we can pick up topics that groups want us to talk about, specific education needs? Could we integrate that with how we report on Watershed Summer projects? Can we change what types of projects we highlight or what trainings we give based on the education needs of groups? And some of this was built out of, in general, during our strategic planning process. And what I've heard from watershed groups and conservation districts is that general watershed education is something we could really support well as MWCC and as a statewide organization. So we'll try to hone that down in 27 and then focus on how we could fund it if there's a need for a specific type of education or specific topic. Then we can really think about, how do we want to fund this? How do we need to prioritize it? And do we need other partners to make it happen? And this is all in a hope as well to just complement the education and outreach programs that each group is able to do, rather than, duplicate it or try to take over or anything like that. We're really trying to figure out how to fill gaps and what people need.
So we're going to switch gears a little bit here and go to a more interactive portion of our presentation. We would like to ask you all to please go to the link. I'm also going to share it in the chat and answer a few questions for us. We're going to start off our strategic plan. If anyone has issues, let me know with that link.
And what we'll see here too is kind of a fun interactive way to comment and participate, to see each other's answers and see what we kind of collectively feel about some of the ideas here. We just kept this pretty short, but because we do well, we've given ourselves a short window goal of understanding how we could participate in policy before the upcoming session. We just wanted to kick off and see what you all thought. If there were ways that groups have thought about that we could actually help build capacity to participate in public policy. And I think you can feel free to think about this as the spaghetti on the wall moment where and creative ideas are welcome. Hey, is anyone struggling with Mentimeter? It's awesome to see these answers coming in. Very cool. This one's just a little more specific then about topics. And I would say let your imagination run wild here too, but also be specific. I know I would say generally we hear a lot about, septic systems as one broad topic, but if you can be more specific, I think that will be even more helpful. And as you're thinking about this too, one of the pieces I'm curious about differentiating again is sort of the level, policy level that this would be at, if it's local or state level, etc. I know groups have different capacity to participate at those different levels, but if there's one that's stuck out as where there are issues, commission level. Yeah, these are great. I will say I'm not overly surprised by seeing some of these just because they're so their things are very relevant and there are a lot of moving pieces. It seems as well that of all the things MWCC gets the sort of air quotes random office phone calls about, or people that are feeling urgent about us about something, it more often is an actual a policy issue or topic moving forward versus an actual, like, I guess you call it like water emergency, as far as like a pipes or drinking water issues or contamination or something. The things people reach out to us really are have moved a little bit towards water quantity than MWCC has really dealt with in the past. Our focus so much has been non-point source pollution reduction and how we can actually support capacity for restoration in that way. And so often, I wouldn't say we've avoided water quantity discussions, but it hasn't been as much in an expertise that either staff or board have had. And so that's certainly a thing that's interesting to know if groups are feeling like a need to know more about that. Okay, so this one, we can open up for discussion after these ones. This one is a little more in depth of a question, but we just wanted you all to be able to take a moment to think about how the watershed approach, again, it's framed the way MWCC has approached supporting watershed groups, and it has framed a lot of the way watershed groups frame working with their communities, and was a shared system of values for us all to operate together. So we're going to ask that you look at these and then actually rate them. So we're going to want to see like how they juxtapose, and if you think if how much we think it's actually working. But yes, starting with the simple piece of, are you aware of it? Because it is something that really underpins the work that we've done in the value system that we hold. So we want to make sure we keep sharing that. And it's okay if the answer is no, too. It doesn't mean you're bad. It means we will educate you today a little bit.
I'm glad you said what was on my mind, Amy.
Okay.
Give me a
I
couple
know,
more
like,
seconds.
yeah.
Bye.
Same with like a lot of focus on storytelling and making sure decision makers know how and what groups are doing to get this work done. I think having this framework has really helped for explaining to people the way that we're coming into a room. And I think it makes a difference when you show up as a partner, not trying to be combative, but trying to be helpful, bringing solutions and listening to your communities. And it's been something we've thought about a lot through our strategic planning process, because how can we as MWCC statewide exemplify principles of the watershed approach at the whole level, when it's taking into consideration the values and needs of many Montana communities.
This
Okay, so
question's interesting. We'll see how
yeah,
it goes. with the rating scale. If you have questions, please let me know. Don't be afraid to message in the chat. I am checking that. Do you want to talk a little bit about importance and relevance, Amy?
Yep. Sending a message in the chat in Google. Yes. So I kind of alluded briefly to it before, but these tenets on the watershed approach are fantastic in theory, and the intent behind them is sincere, and as I mentioned, they were developed through a lot of group work of watershed groups, partners, and the MWCC network to make sure we're acting in the same way. But I wanted to check in on that and have us just think about how important is this? Are they still relevant? Are these tenants that are, as you'll see in the next question, like really happening, or are some of them still more in theory than in practice, just because it's difficult to do them, to execute? And so knowing that we went into our strategic planning process with the assumption that these were the tenets and values of the watershed approach, we were like, yes, we've checked in on these. Our board and staff, we talk about them hopefully a lot, but it is good to revisit them. There were many values at the time during the discussions that did not make it onto this list. So this is a very specific, but we know things are change also.
I'm gonna give you all 30 seconds and we're gonna move on.
Did you put the link also to the Mentimeter in the chat, Kira?
Yes.
Okay. Just in case anyone, I know some people have gotten bumped on and off of the Zoom, just to make sure. So the link for that's in there.
They can also go to menti.com and then just put that code in. Okay, we're moving to the next one.
One more.
I like the answers though. This is similar, but we want to know, like, on what level are you all actually doing these? Like, versus you want to. Amy, I know you came up with this one. Could you explain it a little better?
Yeah, I was thinking again, in theory, these are ideals that we want to strive for, but sometimes we just can't operate at our ideal or most highest functioning level, I suppose. And I especially was wondering, for instance, number 3, like relies on local leadership. I know there have been a lot of local changes in capacity over the past year and a half. And so especially as an example of that, I'm wondering, well, we have local input and we're following a community plan, but maybe actually, this partnership or this work is only happening with federal or other support or somewhere regional, and it's actually not local leadership, but it is functioning. It just happens to be supported maybe by a regional or national group or in some other way. And I think part of the, but part of the result of this can help us see if we need to change how we're approaching it, or if we don't actually, if it's not as important. I think that's the other piece of this. It's interesting, even on the last question, to see on the quadrant that perhaps litigation is not as strictly important to be watershed approach to fit within the approach still. I think some of this can change. I pick up the leadership one because it's interesting. Working with the forest collaboratives, especially, we're part of the Montana Forest Collaborative Network. There was a lot of turnover in local forester capacity. And so some of the really small collaborative groups definitely felt the absence of a federal or regional partner. So it seemed pretty apparent that a lot of the support for the group actually is not at a local level, but it's really felt at the local level.
Couple more seconds. Okay.
Yeah, I see Abby's comment and recommend watching Life in the Land documentaries for inspiration for locally led efforts that bring folks to the table. Totally. Absolutely. And I
This
think
is
that's
our,
mhm.
I was just gonna say, this is our last question for this mentee.
So we wanted to put out there, are there anything, something you ruminated maybe for a while that just or wasn't there that you're surprised is not there? As I mentioned, there were a lot of tenants that were contemplated in previous annual meetings and that they were not brought to the fore. So it would just be interesting to see if there's anything we feel like has changed that needs to be captured.
I will say we won't spend a whole lot of time on this one, but if something comes to your mind after you've had time to ruminate on it after this meeting, feel free to reach out to Amy and I and send a message.
I like the focusing on restoring natural processes. One of the I think if I'm remembering correctly, single word, but it's important, that's different from how we've written up our strategic plan in the past is just making sure and feeling strongly about balancing science with the work that we do at a community level to make sure that we can really agree and rally around certain concepts as a baseline. I think that's really important, helping bring science to the table for supporting natural restoration.
I'm gonna switch back over here. Go.
And then on the questions, yeah, thoughts, I guess what I wanted to think about here, we have plenty of time, but we can actually talk a little bit about especially the policy question or watershed questions that we just looked at on Mentimeter. Does anyone have us, feel strongly about a policy issue or have a question or want to know how or why we're doing or asking these things? Does anyone feel strongly that we shouldn't do any policy work or education work for some reason, or you can voice your concerns? It's like open space.
Can you hear me,
Okay.
Amy?
Oh, there you are. I can hear you now. Yes.
It's Rachel. It can just be a fine line to walk sometimes with policy, especially depending on funding sources. So, if you're, for example, for PSPP for the EPA grant, like that, those funds couldn't be used. So I think if you enter the policy arena more, you have to just be really careful about your documentation of like what funds is supporting the time of doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of us can't do any of it at all. So it's probably important that you have the ability to do it.
Well, and that's what yeah, that's definitely one of the thoughts is like, what need is out there where people really can't do things. And some of what we could do is just ask questions. We don't even necessarily have to lobby per
Mm-hmm.
se, but I think what we're going to start doing really is thinking about what meetings could be relevant for us just to help be like a listening ear to pass information through
I think that would be really
other
helpful
kind of
because it's
thing.
hard to go to enough meetings.
Yeah, and it's definitely one of our benefits being here in Helena, trying to help connect people with the right questions. Funding of it, of course, will be a huge question for me as we and all, yeah, for MWCC as we move forward with it. And so some of this work is helping us really frame what we want that to be before we fundraise for it. So that way, hopefully, we don't get in a position where it feels like we're being asked or funded to do something that wasn't quite the right fit. I have some experience just as another question to put to the group. I've had some experience doing legislative trainings for groups as far as how a group can actually access and prepare to deliver or a testimony or speak in front of people and or on behalf of a group. So that's another question for people if there's, interest in just learning the how to so that the comfort level goes up when you're trying to advocate for a position that can feel really uncomfortable sometimes. So I think that's something that we can definitely offer and think about supporting groups with.
Amy, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think groups are interested in like how to, educate or inform like their local legislature represent or like legislative representatives on what they're like doing within their communities focused on like the watershed approach? Because sometimes I wonder if like people if like the legislature knows like what how different local entities benefit from like state and federal grants or um like just resources in general. um I don't know. have you Do you think groups would benefit from that or be interested in that based on like your conversations
I do
this was
think so, and I think some of that has been what we've tried to produce through the State of the Watersheds Report, so that it is in um represented in more of an objective way, I guess I would say, or in the information is presented not in the context of any specific piece of legislation or rulemaking process, so that it's there as the background education for answering some of those questions, I think, without directly addressing them like regulation by regulation. So I think in that way that effort grew out of that need, yes, that I do see to still be there in that way. And what I have personally received a few more calls about actually are more local issues than state level of let's say if there's a subdivision being approved, perhaps a community member or decision maker would want to, it has reached out to the watershed group, but the watershed group has connected with me saying like, I don't really feel like I have the tools to respond to this, and or we've never been asked to take a position on or like comment on something at that granular of a level. And so some of that makes me think back to that training piece of it where it's, do people need more of the tools to participate at different levels, or is it better to dig in on specific issues? I don't know if did that answer your question, Abby?
Yeah, makes sense that maybe like local issues like subdivision or exempt wells are popping up probably more frequently right now. So balancing that might be interesting in coming into this like next election cycle too, is like what's like local agency need versus like state agency or state government need.
Mm-hmm. And I think the state of the watersheds report has done a really good job representing how state funds have been used. That really helps show, I think, tell that story really well. We are going to make an effort to invite legislators to the tour coming up. So hopefully that can be a way to bridge that gap. I think on and off, it's been an intent of MWCC, and we've had a lot of discussion during events of trying to get legislators in the field with us so they really, really understand what's going on. But that, yeah, the report really sort of shows a little bit more of the money side. And I think, yeah, to the question we asked and what you just mentioned, the issues that are broader, I think will be interesting to see which ones rise to the top. Yeah. Yeah, we'll keep going here. But we're open for discussion if anyone wants to ever call. We have open doors on thoughts on policy. You'll probably hear more and see more from us on this through the fall because we do want to have a good plan going into next session. So moving on to our last topic here. I wanted to share the Wetland Council website and partnership that we have going on. This is something that Steve Carbonato and I and Kiera have been working on for pretty in the trenches for a couple weeks now, but something in concept we've thought about for many months. And DEQ has supported a Montana Wetland Council, but for those of you that don't know, the Montana Wetland Council is another group of professionals and agency personnel and consultants and practitioners who are working to support wetland resources, like very specifically wetland resources. And they've been meeting, and I actually don't know how long they've been meeting for, but a program that we've been integrated with for quite a while. And they have this 2020 to 2030 strategic framework. Their link is here on the slide. It's a really, really well thought out and very detailed plan. And so we worked with DEQ to figure out how MWCC can help achieve a couple of the goals within this plan. And so we are working with the Wetland Council to put forward a brand new website that for now will be hosted under the MWCC website, but will be a Wetland Council website. So a place to find meeting minutes, resources, etc. But we're in the very early processes. So we want to make sure people have the information they need to conserve the resource, protect it, learn about riparian areas, etc. But we're trying to figure out what people want on the website. So right now we're in the very early stages of the design process, and we've gotten a ton of great feedback on this survey, but we are asking that you all do one more survey and share this. You don't have to do it now, but we'll have it in our newsletters. It's a super short survey, just trying to ask what kind of attributes, what information, what keywords, what links, what qualities are you looking for in a wetland focused resource. So that way, if you Google Montana Wetland Council, you can get good information. And that way the Wetland Council also has a place from which to keep bringing people together, hopefully host annual meeting. Actually, Kira, do you remember when we talked about that very briefly, but I can't remember when. But at some point, the Wetland Council will host an in-person meeting. So this is a great opportunity for you all to contribute to what could be on this resource. And we are going to hopefully launch this in the early parts of June, actually. So we're going to keep it super simple to start, but we want to make sure there's something to work from. And yeah.
If you know someone who's interested in filling out the survey, we are seeking responses from everyone, landowners, general public. So please feel free to share this out with whoever.
And that's our simple program for today. We just wanted to make sure we touched base with you all and let you know that what's going on a little bit behind the scenes. It's been busy and we're really, really looking forward to the tour this year. It's definitely our focal event. So it's been really nice to see a bunch of you here.
A few closing items. We are seeking board members. So if that's something you're interested in or someone that you know is, we ask that you fill out this link here for us. I'm going to put that in the chat as well. And a member of our board will reach out to you about joining. And then also, please remember to sign up for hashtag Watershed Summer. I look forward to working with you. And then here is the link for our social media. Please be sure that you're following us for all the updates. And that's what I have.
Yeah, come join us. Come play cornhole with us in Missoula. We have some ideas for our venue that is to be determined, but if someone knows some little gem in the rough in Missoula, please join us.